Life has a peculiar way of testing you when you least expect it. I never imagined I would find myself recounting this story. One that begins with heartbreak and chaos, but ultimately leads to clarity and purpose. My name is Anna Bennett. And for a long time, I believed I lived a typical life, a devoted wife to Gab and a loving mother to Colin. But life has a way of unraveling the facade we create. And mine came crashing down in a way I could have never foreseen. It all started with a betrayal so deep it shook the very foundation of my life. Gab, the man I had trusted with my heart, the father of my son, had been involved in an affair. To make matters worse, the other woman was my best friend. She had been my confidant, someone I leaned on through life's ups and downs. But now, she was carrying a child that Gab believed was his. The weight of this discovery was unbearable. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely lost. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Heaven's Whisper today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. The news didn't just stay within the confines of our home. It spread like wildfire, turning my personal pain into public scandal. Everywhere I went, there were whispers, pitying glances, and judgmental stares. People I once called friends distanced themselves, as if my grief was contagious. Each day felt like a battle just to hold myself together. And every night was a struggle to suppress the tears that seemed endless. As if the emotional turmoil wasn't enough, there was my son, Colin. My bright, beautiful boy had been in a wheelchair since he was 8 years old. Watching him navigate the world with resilience was both inspiring and heartbreaking. I often found myself lying awake at night, wondering if I was doing enough for him, if I could protect him from the harsh realities of life. His needs were immense, and I worried that my crumbling marriage would only add to the burdens he already faced. And then there was the pain, this relentless, nagging ache in my left arm. It started as a mild discomfort but grew into something I couldn't ignore. Yet, in the chaos of my life, it seemed trivial. Gab was too wrapped up in his own mess to notice, and everyone else was too focused on the scandal to care. I told myself it was nothing, just stress or fatigue. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Still, I pushed it aside. There were more pressing issues to deal with, or so I thought. Gab, for his part, attempted to mend the wreckage he had caused. When it turned out the child wasn't his, he came crawling back, begging for forgiveness. He said all the right things, promised to change, but his words felt hollow. How could I believe him? How could I ever trust him again? The love I once felt for him had been replaced by a cold bitterness that seemed to grow with every passing day. Every time I looked at him, I saw the betrayal, the humiliation, and the pain he had inflicted on me. Our home, once a sanctuary, became a place of tension and resentment. The air was heavy with unspoken words and suppressed anger. I felt like a stranger in my own life, trapped in a situation I couldn't escape. The weight of it all was suffocating, and I longed for a way out, a path to reclaim the person I used to be. But life, as I was about to learn, had even more surprises in store for me. What I didn't realize then was that I was nearing a breaking point, and the events that would soon unfold would change everything. Looking back, I can see that those moments of despair were setting the stage for something far greater. Something that would reshape my understanding of life, death, and the unbreakable bond of love. For now, though, I was just Anna Bennett, a woman drowning in pain, trying to stay afloat for the sake of her son, unaware that the storm was far from over. The night that changed everything began like any other. I had grown adept at masking my emotions, pretending that life was normal when, inside, I was barely holding on. That evening, Gab suggested a drive, his way of trying to reconnect. Perhaps. Or maybe just another excuse to smooth over the fractures he'd caused. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe I was tired of fighting. Or maybe I wanted to believe that a part of the man I once loved still existed. The drive started quietly. The silence in the car heavier than the words we didn't dare to speak. My fingers gripped the armrest as I stared out the window. The city lights flickering past like ghosts of the life I once knew. Gab was unusually subdued, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale against the leather. Then, as if he could no longer hold it in, he began to talk. "I want to fix this, Anna," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his own guilt. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I want to make things right. For us. For Colin." His words hung in the air, begging for a response. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, hot and uncontrollable. "Make things right?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do you even understand the damage you've done? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. Our son. How do you even begin to fix that?" Gab glanced at me, his eyes pleading. But I turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. I wasn't ready to forgive. And I didn't think I ever would be. The bitterness that had taken root in my heart was too deep, too consuming. The argument escalated quickly, as it always did. Words flew back and forth, each one cutting deeper than the last. The tension in the car grew unbearable, suffocating, until Gab did something I'll never forget. He reached for my hand, an impulsive, desperate gesture, but instead of comfort, it brought chaos. In his urgency, he grabbed my wedding ring, the symbol of a love I no longer recognized, and tugged at it. "This doesn't mean anything to you anymore, does it?" he shouted, his voice filled with frustration and pain. I pulled my hand away instinctively, clutching the ring as though it were the last piece of myself I had left. "Let go, Gab," I yelled. But he didn't listen. His face twisted into an expression I couldn't recognize: rage, desperation, regret, all at once. Before I knew it, he lunged at me, his hands grasping for mine. The car swerved violently as he lost control of the wheel. What happened next is a blur, but I remember the feeling of his hands around my neck, the crushing pressure stealing the air from my lungs. I struggled, clawing at his arms, trying to scream, but no sound came out. The world around me began to fade, the edges of my vision turning black as my strength ebbed away. Then, everything stopped. I felt a sudden lightness, as if the weight of my body had vanished. For a moment, I thought I had lost consciousness. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the car anymore. At least, not in the way I expected. I was hovering above it, looking down at the scene below. There I was, slumped in the passenger seat, motionless, while Gab panicked, shaking me and shouting my name. It was the strangest sensation, being outside of myself. There was no fear, no pain, only a serene detachment, as though I was observing a story that no longer belonged to me. I felt a tug, gentle but insistent, pulling me away from the car, away from the chaos. And then I saw a light. It wasn't blinding or harsh, it was warm, inviting, and filled with a love so profound it brought me to tears. I was drawn to it, unable to resist its pull. As if it were calling to something deep within my soul. As I moved closer, the world I had known faded away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. The light embraced me, wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. In that moment, I understood things I could never have comprehended before. Life, love, and even death, it all made sense in a way that words could never capture. I wasn't alone in this place, I could feel a presence. Not physical, but deeply familiar. As though it had been with me all along. Then, a vision appeared before me. Vivid and undeniable. I saw Colin not as he was, but as he could be. He was older. Standing tall. No longer confined to a wheelchair. His face radiated joy and confidence. And beside him stood a woman. Her hand entwined with his. They shared a love so pure it brought a smile to my face. In another scene, I saw Colin playing with two small children, my grandchildren, his laughter filling the air as he lifted them high in his arms. The vision shifted again, showing Colin in a professional setting, speaking to a captivated audience. His words inspired them, moved them, and I could see the profound impact he was having on the world. My heart swelled with pride. And I realized something that changed everything: I couldn't leave him. Not yet. Colin needed me to guide him to that future. The light seemed to understand my hesitation. It didn't push or pull, but rather, it waited, giving me the space to decide. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, filled with pain and challenges. But I also knew it was worth it. For Colin. For the life he was meant to live. I had to go back. With a heavy heart and a newfound sense of purpose. I turned away from the light, ready to face whatever awaited me. But my journey wasn't over yet. As I began to drift back, the warmth of the light faded, replaced by something colder, darker, a realm I was not prepared to face. The sensation of being pulled upward was fleeting. Just as I thought I was escaping the heavy darkness, I felt myself jerked back down, deeper than before. This time, it wasn't just whispers and shadows, it was a suffocating presence. A heavy weight pressing against my entire being. The realm around me shifted, becoming sharper, more defined, and undeniably more terrifying. I found myself standing on what felt like solid ground, though it pulsed beneath me, as if alive. Around me, the air was thick, making it difficult to breathe. And the sky, or whatever passed for it, was an ominous gray, swirling with shadows and streaks of sickly red. The cries of anguish were no longer distant whispers, they surrounded me. Raw and piercing. It wasn't just sound, it was a vibration that cut straight through me. As though the pain of this place was trying to become a part of me. The figures here were more distinct. Their forms clearer. Though still not fully human. They carried with them a weight. Not physical, but emotional. Their bodies hunched as if bearing invisible burdens. I watched as one soul seemed to claw at the ground, trying to dig its way out of a pit that wasn't there. Another paced endlessly, their lips moving in silent pleas, their eyes filled with despair. I realized I could see more than their actions, I could feel their emotions. The regret, the guilt, the self-loathing, they were so potent. It was as if they were my own. Each soul seemed trapped in its own personal torment, reliving moments of pain and regret, unable to break free. Then I noticed something that struck me. Some of these souls appeared translucent, as if fading into the background, while others seemed solid, almost real. It was as though their torment shaped their very essence, the intensity of their emotions giving them form and weight. The ones who clung to their anguish appeared the most vivid, their suffering grounding them in this dark realm. I wandered through the space, drawn forward by an unseen force. As I moved, I noticed the scenes playing out around me. One soul, bound by chains that didn't exist, seemed to be reliving a moment of betrayal, angry shouts, a door slamming, and the look of heartbreak on a woman's face. Looping endlessly. Another sat in a corner, clutching their knees, their face hidden, surrounded by images of people they had hurt, their eyes filled with unrelenting sorrow. It was then that I began to understand. This wasn't a place anyone was sent to, it was a place they created for themselves. The chains, the torment, the endless loops of regret, they weren't punishments inflicted by an external force. They were the result of choices, actions, and the inability to let go of the pain they had caused or endured. This realm wasn't hell, it was a reflection. A mirror showing these souls the consequences of their lives. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pull in my chest, and I realized I was being drawn toward another figure. As I approached, a sense of familiarity washed over me, and I stopped in my tracks. The figure before me was someone I recognized. It was my mother. She turned slowly, her face twisted with an expression I had never seen in life, anguish mixed with shame. She didn't seem to notice me, her gaze fixed on something distant, something only she could see. Around her, I could make out faint images of arguments, of slammed doors, of moments when anger had consumed her. The scenes seemed to circle her like vultures, their presence oppressive and unrelenting. "Mom?" I called out, my voice trembling. But she didn't respond. It was as if my words couldn't reach her, as though she was too consumed by the weight of her own pain to notice anything else. I wanted to help her, to pull her out of this torment, but I didn't know how. A wave of helplessness washed over me as I realized that her suffering was beyond my reach. And then I felt a presence behind me. Warm, familiar, and reassuring. It wasn't the radiant light from before, but it carried a similar sense of comfort. I turned, and though there was no physical form, I felt its guidance as it nudged me gently forward. "She can't hear you," the presence seemed to say, though no words were spoken. "Not until she is ready." The realization struck me like a blow. These souls couldn't be saved by anyone else. Their escape from this realm depended on their own willingness to let go of their pain and take responsibility for their choices. It wasn't about punishment, it was about growth. About finding the strength to face themselves and move forward. As I stood there, a strange calm settled over me. I couldn't save my mother or anyone else in this place, but I could choose for myself. I could choose to return, to live differently, to make choices that wouldn't trap me in a place like this. And maybe, just maybe, by living my life with purpose and love, I could inspire others to do the same. The presence behind me grew stronger, its warmth enveloping me like a shield against the darkness. The oppressive weight began to lift, and I felt myself being pulled upward once again. The cries and whispers faded into the background, and the suffocating air grew lighter. I glanced back one last time, my eyes lingering on my mother's form, and silently prayed that she would one day find her way out. As the darkness receded, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had seen the depths of despair, and I knew I didn't belong there. There was work to be done both for myself and for the ones I loved. And as I ascended, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could still be found. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I'd been underwater for hours. The world around me snapped into focus, a blur of flashing lights, muffled voices, and the cold, rough texture of the ground beneath me. My chest heaved with the effort of breathing, each inhale sharp and painful, as though my body was relearning how to live. I was back, I had returned to the physical world. But nothing felt the same. The night air was crisp, stinging my skin as I tried to piece together what had happened. Gab was hovering over me, his face pale and streaked with panic. His hand shook as he reached for me, muttering words I couldn't quite make out. I instinctively recoiled, the memory of his hands on my neck still fresh in my mind. His touch, once familiar, now felt like a violation, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. "Anna," he stammered, his voice thick with fear. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." I didn't let him finish. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling under the weight of what I had endured. My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it carried the firmness of resolve. "Don't touch me, Gab. It's over." His eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved vulnerable, regretful, and utterly lost. But that man no longer held a place in my heart. The events of that night had severed the final thread tying me to him. Without another word, I turned away, stumbling toward the road where the faint glow of headlights signaled safety. Each step felt like a declaration of freedom, a reminder that I had survived. In the days that followed, my body bore the physical reminders of Gab's violence, the bruises on my neck, the soreness in my chest, and the exhaustion that seemed to settle deep in my bones. But it was the emotional wounds that cut the deepest. Sleep eluded me, haunted by vivid flashes of the darkness I had encountered. The cries of the tormented souls echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the choices I needed to make. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone. Therapy became my lifeline, a space where I could unpack the trauma of that night and the profound journey I had experienced. At first, I struggled to find the words to describe what I had seen and felt. How could I explain the light, the visions of Colin's future, or the harrowing realm of despair? I feared being dismissed as delusional. But as I opened up, I found unexpected clarity. Each session helped me piece together the fragmented puzzle of my experience, grounding me in the present while allowing me to honor what I had learned. One of the most challenging aspects was facing my anger toward Gab. The betrayal, the violence, and the pain he had caused were undeniable. But so too was the understanding I had gained in the other realm. His actions, as terrible as they were, stemmed from his own unresolved struggles. While I couldn't excuse or forget what he had done, I began to recognize that forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. Holding on to anger would only tether me to the darkness I had seen, and I was determined to break free. Colin became my anchor through it all. His resilience and optimism, even in the face of his own challenges, inspired me to keep moving forward. I saw him with new eyes, not as a boy limited by his wheelchair, but as a person of immense potential. The vision of his future guided me like a lighthouse in the storm, reminding me of the life we could build together. Our first step was leaving Gab behind. I found a small apartment for Colin and me, a modest place, but one that felt safe and full of promise. It was a chance to start over, to create a home where we could heal and grow. The transition wasn't easy. Colin struggled to understand why his father wasn't with us, and I did my best to explain in terms he could grasp. I assured him that we were embarking on a new chapter, one where we could focus on the things that truly mattered. Work became another hurdle to overcome. Returning to my job felt surreal, as if I were stepping into a life that no longer fit. My colleagues were kind, their concern evident in their sympathetic glances, but I found it hard to concentrate. The weight of my experiences pressed against me, making it difficult to engage with the mundane tasks of daily life. But gradually, I began to find my footing. Each small success a project completed, A kind word from a coworker was a reminder that I was still capable, still moving forward. As I rebuilt my life, I found myself drawn to moments of quiet reflection. Meditation became a daily ritual, a way to connect with the peace I had felt in the light. I began to see life through a different lens, appreciating the small joys I had once taken for granted: Colin's laughter, the warmth of the morning sun, the simple pleasure of a cup of tea. These moments, though fleeting, anchored me in the present and reminded me of the beauty still to be found in the world. But the road wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the darkness felt closer, when the memories of that night threatened to pull me under. On those days, I leaned into the vision I had seen: a future where Colin thrived, where he stood tall and strong, inspiring others with his courage. That image became my guiding star, illuminating the path forward even in my darkest moments. Piece by piece, I began to rediscover myself. I wasn't the same Anna Bennett who had walked into that car with Gab. That woman had been lost, defined by betrayal and pain. But now, I was someone new, stronger, wiser, and more determined. I had faced death and returned, carrying with me the lessons of the light and the shadows. And though the journey was far from over, I knew I was on the right path. Each day was a step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming the life I was meant to live. And as I looked at Colin, his bright smile a testament to his own resilience, I knew that we were heading towards something extraordinary. The future wasn't just a vision anymore, it was a reality waiting to be built, one moment at a time. The years that followed my near-death experience were nothing short of transformative. Each step forward felt like shedding an old layer of myself, revealing a version of Anna Bennett I never thought possible. The journey was not without challenges, but every obstacle became an opportunity to grow, to redefine what life meant to me, and to move closer to the vision I had seen of Colin's future. The first major milestone came when Colin and I settled into our new home. It was modest, but brimming with the promise of a fresh start. I poured my energy into creating a space where he could feel safe and thrive. Slowly, our days began to take on a sense of normalcy. Mornings were filled with laughter over breakfast, and evenings became a time to share stories and dreams. I made a conscious effort to nurture his independence, encouraging him to take small steps, both literal and figurative, toward his potential. One of those steps came when doctors presented us with the possibility of experimental therapy to improve Colin's mobility. It was a daunting prospect, filled with risks and uncertainties. But Colin's determination was unwavering. "I want to try, Mom," he said, his eyes alight with the kind of resolve that reminded me of the vision I had seen. I knew then that I had to support him, no matter how difficult the journey might be. The therapy was grueling. There were days when Colin's frustration boiled over, and I had to remind him and myself that progress was rarely linear. I held on to the image of him standing tall, walking confidently, as a beacon of hope during those moments when doubt threatened to creep in. Slowly but surely, his efforts began to pay off. The first time he stood on his own, even if just for a few seconds, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude so profound it brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just his victory, it was ours. While Colin worked tirelessly on his physical recovery, I focused on my own transformation. My near-death experience had reshaped the way I saw the world, and I felt compelled to share that perspective. It started small conversations with friends, then speaking in support groups for others who had endured trauma or loss. Each time I shared my story, I felt a sense of catharsis and purpose. People began to tell me how much my words resonated, how they found strength and hope in the lessons I had learned. Eventually, those intimate gatherings grew into something larger. I was invited to speak at community events, and later, at conferences where people sought answers about life, death, and the resilience of the human spirit. I never saw myself as a spiritual leader or a guru. But I understood the power of connection. The importance of letting others know they weren't alone. Sharing my journey became a way to honor what I had experienced and to inspire others to find meaning in their own struggles. Forgiveness was another key part of my transformation. For years, I held on to the pain and anger caused by Gab's betrayal and violence. It was a heavy burden. One that often felt like an anchor dragging me back into the darkness. But as I revisited the lessons I had learned during my journey beyond life, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions, it was about freeing myself. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about Gab, the memories of that night resurfaced, raw and vivid. But over time, I began to see him through a different lens. He was a broken man, shaped by his own fears and insecurities. And while that didn't justify his behavior, it helped me understand it. Slowly, I let go of the resentment, replacing it with compassion, not for his sake, but for mine. When Colin expressed a desire to reconnect with his father during his teenage years, I didn't stand in his way. I encouraged him to approach the relationship with an open heart, knowing that forgiveness was one of the most powerful tools we had. Their reunion was emotional. And while Gab and I would never rebuild what we once had, I saw a different man, a man who had faced his own reckoning and was trying, in his own way, to make amends. Colin's growth was nothing short of remarkable. The therapy he had worked so hard for began to yield results that astounded everyone, including his doctors. By his early 20s, he wasn't just walking, he was thriving. He pursued his education with a passion that left me in awe and became an advocate for others with physical challenges. Watching him speak to audiences about resilience and hope, I saw the vision I had been given come to life. He was no longer the boy confined to a wheelchair, he was a man who inspired countless others with his story. In those moments, I realized why I had been given a second chance. It wasn't just to help Colin reach his potential, it was to live fully. To embrace the beauty of life and the connections we share with others. I learned to cherish every moment. Every laugh. Every tear. The simple joys of life became treasures, a warm cup of tea, a conversation with a stranger, the feel of sunlight on my skin. The lessons of my near-death experience guided me in ways I never anticipated. I stopped sweating the small things and began focusing on what truly mattered: love, kindness, and the connections that bind us. I understood that life wasn't about perfection but about progress. About making choices that aligned with the values of compassion and understanding. Looking back, I see that night in the car as a turning point, not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. It was a painful, terrifying experience. But it led me to a life filled with purpose, resilience, and love. I am not the same Anna Bennett I was before. And for that, I am deeply grateful. As Colin and I continue forward, I carry the lessons of that experience with me every day. Life is fragile, but it is also incredibly precious. We may stumble, face darkness, and endure pain. But through it all, we have the power to rise, to heal, and to create something beautiful. My journey isn't over, but I walk it now with a heart full of hope and a spirit unshaken by fear. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Heaven's Whisper today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.